Hi, I'm Deirdre. I am an interdisciplinary object designer. That means that I am an industrial designer also with a material and ceramic specialty. I'm also a huge fan of speculative futures. I've been a part of the community in New York and also in San Francisco for some time now. I like to look at it from maybe a little bit more of an artistic lens. Um, but I love it so much. I'm really excited to share some of the things that I know about it with you all. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I am also in the middle of a big move from San Francisco back to New York, as Jeff mentioned. So I'm happy to talk about those differences in the speculative design community as well afterwards. Anna?
Yeah, well, I'm Anna. I'm from Spain. So right now I work as innovation consultant and also a strategic designer. So I work in a small design studio where we're helping entrepreneurs to bring their ideas to life. So we help them build prototypes, but also create their business model and have different strategies to launch into the market. We use speculative futures actually at work because we want those entrepreneurs to feel how they will impact the people that will use their products in the future and not just think about their prototypes right now, but think more into the future. And also I'm working in two companies. So in the other one, it's more working with corporates as innovation consultants, so helping them to have like a more of an innovative culture, also agile methodologies and things like that. And I'm also very interested in bringing speculative future in that world as well. And I'm part of the speculative futures chapter of London. I'm also joining the meetups in Madrid. But right now everything is virtual, so I'm still more in the London one, even if I'm living in Madrid.
That's the beauty of being virtual, right? You can maintain friendships in more places.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So, well, that's our agenda for today is to explain how future thinking it's bringing all these 4 points to life. So I'm gonna start with empowerment and clarity, and then the other will continue with political and collaborative. So speculative futures will enable empowerment. So let's start from the beginning. So what do we mean by future thinking? So future thinking has evolved a lot since it started. During the 70s, people will refer to it as predicting the future. On the 80s, a more adventurous connotation came out as exploring the futures, to move into a more proactive one in the 90s as building the desirable futures. And now, because of automation, because of climate change, media disruption, machine intelligence, even COVID-19, people are starting to believe that they are living as victims of a future shock. So therefore, emerging as a current need, future thinking now means using the future to transform the world and ourselves. Um, so when we think about future thinking, uh, we're always asking, would you like to know what the future looks like? Or is it better to decide? So as future thinkers, we like to expand the field and we like to imagine new possibilities so that we're able to make decisions and be ready for disruptions. So it's far more important to be imaginative than to be right here. So we're creating new ideas and bringing imagination rather than being right and finding what's going to happen next. So those are two examples from VMH Studio. So using imagination, what we do is we build prototypes. So that's a vibe emotional sensing necklace. So basically the artifact is combining conductive ink and tactile sensors so that it can read the biometrical signals of the wearer and communicate them to other devices or to other wearers. So for instance, if you and your mom are wearing that necklace, you will be able to communicate your emotions. So an artifact like this one might put us to question whether this will enable a new level of a more humane and empathetic communication, or will that restrict our privacy? And then on the other side, we'll have another example, which is more visual actually. So that's a dress it was an experimentation shifting from emotional sensing from a more intelligent and sensitive product. So this dress will show your emotions based on the environment and based on your current state of mind. It will change the color, but also the pattern. So if you are feeling more angry, it can shrink and then become red. And if you feel very cheerful, it will be loose and maybe yellow, or it will depend on the mood. So similar to the sensor we saw before, only this time everyone in front of you will be able to see how you feel. So this was prototyped back in 2006, and we believe this is something that still makes you feel uncomfortable. Although if we look at the past, not long time ago, and I say that because if we speak with our grandparents, for example, it was difficult for them to imagine a world in which we will be constantly sharing everything with everyone. And right now on Instagram, we're posting every day our breakfast, our lunch, the book we're currently reading, our trips, our daily habits. So why not be ready to share our emotions, let's say in 10 years time? So prototypes will guide us through the futures we want, and they will stop us from the futures we don't. And this is why future thinking can be a great tool to empower you to take action towards the future. So of course, some futures seem relatively predictable, while others, such as confinement recently, did not. So we're currently living an undeniable instability and emotional reality that is at the same time encouraging for future thinkers, because yes, this is an unprecedented crisis, but it is also an unprecedented opportunity. And moving into the benefits of future thinking, we have that thinking about the future will enhance your creativity. You will be imagining new things. Foresight will protect you from being blindsided, as you will come up with new possibilities. Mental flexibility will allow you to understand that things can change and can be different. Regarding practical skepticism, applying critical thinking and don't buying into the hype becomes a key mindset. Empathy, very important here, will arise as you become aware of the hopes and the fears of others. So you will be able to understand the effects of future thinking in your communities and in your societies. As strategy, we will set the goals and the course of action of our businesses. So using future thinking will allow you to connect the dots between your present and your preferred future. And there's also hope here. So looking into the future will build your confidence. The actions you take today can make a big impact in your own future, and a sense of optimism will emerge. So the future does not just happen to us, we have agency, and we're able to imagine the kinds of futures we want to live in and help to create them. So 7 qualities when practicing future thinking will help you understand and identify opportunities to develop projects or ideas that can change the world for the better.
Can I just pause there for a second and take
Yeah.
a minute to, something you said that was very interesting to me was that speculative futures allows us to regain some agency in a world that where that may seem out of our grasp. Deirdre, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later also when we talk about how... No, yeah. When we talk about how speculative futures can be collaborative and how they can also be political in a way, we talk about how speculative futures, I mean, in my opinion, should be used to regain agency, right? We should be able to be allowed to use this as a methodology to improve our lives and improve the world that we live in, and also to help to influence others or share these visions with others, right? And agency is important, especially when we talk about, you guys are doing this project, this design sprint, talking about Black Lives Matters, for example. When we talk about using speculative futures as a form of agency to tell our own stories, to also gain a sense of empowerment and a sense of like agency over what our futures can look like for people who perhaps are not being taken care of or are not being considered in the mean or in the average of policy, So
it's really interesting. This American Life replayed an episode where they were and one of the stories involved was sort of African Americans using science fiction as a way to, as you said, regain their power and regain their agency by imagining a new reality. And so rather than trying to carve out a role in the existing paradigm that's clearly oppressive, they can create a new future where they're, and I think we saw this a little bit in the Marvel movie as well, right? Where they're trying to carve out that new future. So that's really fascinating, Deirdre. That, I mean, that, and Anna, that's a really great start. Please.
Yeah, I think especially right now, because it's very uncertain, everything that is happening. So having a bit of agency and thinking towards what can happen next and own that.
Very cool.
So, yeah, I will continue with clarity now. So diving a bit into the theory of, of future thinking. So there are 5 principles. So the first one will be forget about predictions. So the aim here is to be prepared for all possibilities coming up. So we're not looking at one event in particular, but at the interconnections between technology and society, between economy and organization. So when making decisions, our sweet spot will be 10 years, because that will give us enough time for things to change dramatically, but also for technology to evolve at an exponential growth. Also focus on signals. This is key. A signal, we call a signal a clue of the future in the present. So anything weird that surprises you, anything that makes you ask why. A good example of this is in this sign that says no drones allowed. So this is a real sign from 2015 that is currently placed at a park in New Zealand. And this is certainly something that makes you ask why. So would there be drones everywhere so that they need to be banned in parks in order for us to be able to see a free blue sky somewhere? Another example of that is AI hiring systems. So those are being developed right now to work around competencies, skills, and potential. So there are several researches being done and different companies working on that and even using it. So that might light us on the fact that the future of hiring can be very different from the one we know right now. So workers will not be evaluated on past experiences, on past degrees anymore, but on future contributions and how those align with the desired direction of the company. Then we have look back to see forward. It has been proven many times that we don't repeat our story, but we do repeat patterns. So when printing was invented, there was a big noise regarding too many people being able to distribute information. So who has the power to say what's true? So I believe right now you're thinking about social media and fake news. So you can see that this pattern is still very relevant today. Then we also have uncover those patterns. So we're used to living a reality that we've assumed as normal for a long time. But if we look at those signals, we will be able to discover new patterns. So for instance, open source software changed the way we do things, and some were not paying attention to it. So if you just think about the launch of Wikipedia, for example. And then create a community. This is very important. So thinking about the future is part of a collaborative task. We need experts from different domains in order to lower the risk of being blindsided by future consequences. So basically you want to engage as many people as possible and get a diversity of views, as we need to generate empathy. And this webinar can be the place for that, of course. And the other will explain more about building a community as well later on. And so there are 2 main frameworks that I'm going to explain. So one is the cone, and then the other one is the wheel of possibilities. So starting with the cone, every time we mention future thinking, it looks like we're always trying to pin the future down, but we're far away from that. So if we look at technology, future predictions have been proven wrong again and again. And I believe most of us are still waiting to have our flying car parked on our balcony.
I don't need a flying car. I just want the I want the hoverboard from Back to the Future. Where's my hoverboard?
Yeah, that sounds better actually. Yeah, we're still waiting for those.
Yes.
So when we look at the cone, we're interested of the idea of future possibilities. and each cone will represent a different level of likelihood. So if we start with the narrowest one, we have probable futures. So this is what is likely to happen. This is where most designers operate. So if you look at current trends report, you might end up here. An example can be, it is very probable that in 10 years, our life expectancy will increase, unless there is a big financial crash, a war, or a big COVID-19 happening again. This is very likely to happen. Moving into the second one, we have plausible futures. So this is what could happen according to our current knowledge of how the world works. So this is a scenario of planning and foresight. So we imagine what could happen by modeling alternative futures, looking at the global economic or political shifts. So here we explore to ensure that we'll be prepared and thrive through those crises that can happen. So a plausible future can be AI will replace some marketing roles, such as telemarketing. Then moving into possible futures, this will make the links between today's world and the suggested one, expanding the cone. So some scenarios are difficult to imagine as they involve future knowledge, which we do not yet possess, but are possible. So a good example for this is the warp drive from Star Trek. It is necessary to have them into account as they're just even if they're just entirely fictional, because they will serve as aid for critical reflection. And this will be the territory for speculative futures writing or for science fiction. And then the most interesting one is the preferred futures. So those are what we think should happen. And in here, you are involving your personal value judgments, and you can have global climate scenarios coming to mind here. So we're actually creating what if scenarios that will drive debate, bring discussions, and hopefully action. So we can imagine a different futures, such as what if we would earn money by learning rather than by working? As our working skills will increase, we will learn more, and therefore we will earn more money. So that can be a future where we can imagine. Or what if everyone could pay to increase their cognitive availabilities? So apart from the chip implants that can rewire your brain or upload new memories, there has actually been a study that discovered that sapping elderly brains can increase their working memory, and they will stimulate it up to the level of a 20-year-old. So it's quite crazy the features you can imagine with that. So by narrowing them down, you can start to see plausible options and to take action in order to eliminate error. So it's also important to mention that the judgment of what's possible, plausible, probable, preferable will depend on the time that you're doing the exercise, and the assessments may change as time goes on. So as an example for that, for the Apollo moon landing, President Kennedy will begin having that as a preferred future, and it began to be merely possible, but not yet plausible for him, as the knowledge did not exist at the time. But well, he took action and got humankind to the moon. So you can refer to the different cones as your comfort zone as well. It is tempting to look at probable futures, but I hope you will by now look forward and explore new and wider areas. And then, so moving into the insight to action, this is a bit of an introduction. So this tool was created by Bob Johansen and was designed for a VUCA world. So this is a changing world shaped by dilemmas. So what we want here is to change volatility by vision. So where to look to find the answers. Uncertainty will become understanding. We're listening to people. Complexity will become clarity. So we will behave as the military, as if we're not clear about many things that can happen, but we have a clear direction. And it's also important to stay flexible here because the circumstances can change. We just have to be clear about where we're going, even if the path might be different. And then ambiguity will become agility, and we will be creating a faster interaction cycle to sense and respond throughout the new projects that we're working on. So this will be the wheel. So it is a model for foresight to provoke insight that will then drive action with the aim of enabling us to make better decisions. So foresight is a plausible and provocative story about the future. Our minds are wired by stories. So foresight will enable us to sense and understand the context around dilemmas. We're not looking to predict, we're looking to provoke our creativity and prepare for biggest challenges. So you will be able to sense what could happen before it happens, and therefore identifying different innovation opportunities. Insight will be this aha moment that will change your perception, and it will contribute to your strategy and will seed innovation. So finding an insight is hard work. You need to be open-minded and look towards future possibilities. And then action will be the way forward. It needs to be expressed clearly. So using your insight, you will learn when to act and how, and you will need to connect people and ideas, of course, in order to avoid all mistakes and suggest new features. And yeah, I'm gonna give path to the editor now.
I'm just fascinated by that, Anna. And again, it's not something that we haven't thought of. It's just seeing it written as such, and the idea of, because it's very easy to extrapolate a linear trend into the future and call that a prediction. But then this idea of plausible versus possible is a nice blend. And yeah, your drone sign is interesting because that's a sign from New Zealand, and here in the Bay Area, well, Deidre in the East Bay, as you know that area, there's signs in the parks here in the Bay Area as well that there's no drones allowed. Yeah. And
not yet in Spain.
I contrast that with a picture that I saw last night on Instagram, which was a time lapse of the Neowise comet, but they were able to capture the paths of satellites in the sky as well. And to the naked eye, it may not be obvious in a split second, but if you open the lens and extend the time, that picture of the comet was obscured by all of these streaking lights across the sky that represented various satellites in orbit. And it was just, it was pollution. I mean, that was my word, but I felt like it was pollution. And so it's very interesting to frame that vision based on what you shared. Very fascinating, like totally eye-opening. This is great.
Okay, great. So I'm going to actually just follow up. So we have two more points about speculative futures, and I want to use these points to give examples of people practicing in the field of speculative future and speculative design. And I just want to start off with this Dunn and Raby quote. Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby are some of the founders, modern founders of speculative design. And they say, if we speculate more about everything, reality will become more malleable, and the ideas freed by speculative design increase the odds of achieving desirable futures. And when we talk about speculative futures, it's really important to talk about speculative design as a practice. It's a subset. And that's because it's the realization of the fictions that we develop. And the visions are often critical, but also express hope, which is what we are going to talk about today. And speculative design is the design, just for reference, it's the design of objects, fictions, and realities under the guise of speculative futures to uncover and research our futures. So speculative futures can be political. And political can mean a few things. It can be the exploration of socio-political pasts and presents to uncover socio-political futures. It can use these elements to explore desired futures, and it can be used to explore politically charged topics as well. And I'd like to go back to these cones for a moment to talk about the concept of preferred futures, or as I like to explore in these slides, desirable futures, because what is really important, it's a really important concept. And also when we say preferable or desirable, it's really important to ask, for whom is this preferable? For whom is this desirable? Who is the target of our desired futures, and who is crafting these futures and who is experiencing them? Because there is a difference between maybe one or the other, right? We want to think about who. That is something that we are talking about right now, especially in design, is for whom. So this is a project by Annie Liu, who is a speculative design artist, and it's called Controlled Spermatoza, and it's a meditation on a woman's control over her own body and autonomy. So there's a social and cultural experiences here that are becoming politicized using existing technology. So this is a direct response from her to Donald Trump's conversation with Billy Bush, where he talks about asserting physical control over women and whether or not they consent. And she is sort of talking about how do we regain as women, or as in the female body, how can we regain control? And I really think this is an interesting experiment, because she's using existing EEG technology, which is the basically using electromagnetic waves to stimulate the brain and to read the brain. It's through the electrical impulses. And she's using existing technology to enact a preferable future, which is the autonomy or power to control the direction of sperm in the female body.
Wow.
This is a project by Ayo Okusende. He's a critical designer, a fabricator, and an artist. This project, The Rift, An Afronaut's Journey, is a response to a personal encounter that he had with a police officer in New York City, where the officer actually threw him to the ground, saying that he tried to cross the street while the light was red. And he talked about this experience at the Primer Conference in 2018, about how he feared at that moment for his life. And that experience directly influenced a series of projects where he started thinking about, in his words, the representation of Blackness and how America sees Blackness. And he decided to project Blackness into the future and come back from the future as an Afronaut, and to explore the definitions of that using the concept of time travel and culture. Hold on a second. And I'd like to play this quick video that he produced for this project. So he's crafted a narrative for the Afronaut existing in the future. He's crafted a full suit. He's embodying this future speculation, and he has traveled back in time to our present to engage in Black culture and engage in American culture. He's also crafted all of these really beautiful and interesting artifacts, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so that is his way of sharing that project through that video, and you can see the whole embodiment, right, of the character that he has created to sort of investigate our present and future experiences. And he created these artifacts that he crafted to support this future, and you saw it called out in the video. And you can see that material, form, and craft technique are all used to construct this narrative. So he goes through, he takes a signal, which is his experience with this police officer, and he uses it to project this speculative fiction, and to completely embody that speculative fiction throughout all of the details. So using craft techniques that he believes he thinks will exist in the future, and using artifacts that he thinks that will help him to time travel back into our present. This is another project that he did in collaboration with a few other people. It's called Argus, and it is a citizen's exoskeleton. as a form of protection against the police. They came up with this project in 2017, which means they probably were developing it for a couple years as well before that. And we see how relevant this is today in this discussion, how relevant it was back in 2017. Also, the conversation about citizen protection, the conversation about how is it that we protect ourselves in a system that maybe it is not for us, right? Or is not for people of color in this country. And this is a completely functioning exosuit, as they call it. And so this is another example of using existing technology to create future products, create future realities to discuss and be critical about how we move forward as a culture and society. And the last point I'd like to share with you all is that speculative futures can be collaborative. And when we say that, we don't mean collaborative within the team, we mean collaborative with real people who work outside of design and strategy and should be collaborative with those people. This is a workshop that I worked on with my colleague from the Pratt Institute in New York, Martin Sambathi, and this is called the Narrative Toolkit. And we collaborated with formerly incarcerated people, public health workers, and criminal justice reform activists to imagine the future of the criminal justice system in America. This was back in 2017. Let's see if this works here. Is that working for everybody?
Not playing yet.
Okay, I'm gonna switch over.
But please drop the link in the chat and maybe we can all pull it up separately.
Yeah.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, let's get this going here. Here we go. It's just a time lapse of what we did. I'm just going to go to the next page. We were exploring the experience of incarceration and reentry into society. So our professor at the time, Dorami Diata, she organized a big gathering of people who were exploring criminal justice reform already. These are not people in design and not people in strategy. These are all activists. These are all formerly incarcerated people, writers, artists. And so we facilitated this collaboration. She helped us facilitate this collaboration. And we were able to perform this workshop where we used a toolkit that we designed called the Narrative Toolkit to start with a base common language for everybody who was participating. Because I think when you collaborate with other people from different fields, using a lot of language that is outside of people's comfort zone can be an inhibitor. So we designed a visual language for everybody to use to discuss the experience of incarceration and also re-entry into society. And then from there to project desired futures. We're not even like hypothesizing about the future of the criminal justice reform world based on signals. We're talking about what we really want to see happen. And participants were encouraged to use a series of these visual metaphors to assist in extrapolating their past experiences and desired futures. So sorry, I went backwards. So we used 4 subsets of language. We had objects, which are these circles or triangles, and those were the stakeholders at play. So these were maybe an individual, an institution, or a community. We had terrain, so we could talk about physical and emotional spaces that people were existing in. We also had arcs and pathways, so these are trajectories moving from these emotional or physical spaces. And then we had these visual indicators for mood to talk about, how people are feeling in these places, because that is an important form of quote unquote data that we don't really talk about and is really important when we talk about experiences like being a part of the criminal justice system. And these futures became really detailed and striking. This is one future that was led. We had each participant lead a discussion about their desired future, and then everybody collaborated together to sort of form that future. This one was led by Craig Hartel, who is a student activist at Pratt. And he posed the question, what if smaller and alternative communities grow to collaboratively take over the status quo or mainstream society. So something that we talked about is that the experience within mainstream society is sort of, there's a shame narrative that exists when you have been incarcerated, and there is a lack of trust around formerly incarcerated people from society that stems out of a historic, there's a lot of history there. We all understand that. And he talks about, why are we subscribing to this status or mainstream form of doing things? Why don't we create these tiny little communities that can come together, that are niche, that are specific to people's needs and care for people, and then we can come together as a larger community. I find like, you know, looking back at this now, I find this to be really interesting when we look at what happened during COVID, all of these tiny little mutual aid networks coming together to help each other and to build like a larger, more sustainable community. You can see this being a really positive scenario across multiple sectors, not just criminal justice reform, not just community building. You can see that happening during COVID too. And I feel like when we talk about these desired futures, there's like an element of inspiration, and there is an element of pulling into like a universal sense of humanity as well. These are some other selected visualizations that people came up with. And, you know, we're talking about utopian experiences where people are taking care of each other and not feeling restricted by systems of oppression. Experiences where perhaps people have a chance to go to jail and understand what it feels like, people who haven't necessarily committed a crime. So we've all sorts of things that have come up here. And you know, the point of this workshop wasn't necessarily to come up with the solutions, but by collaborating on these desired futures, we have people who are in public health and in charge of policy walking away inspired. We have people who are working as activists walking away as inspired. And we also have us, the designers, who have collaborated with these people and learned from them. And we are learning how we can possibly use this information that we've gleaned from these collaborations, and how that influences our future design work.
Deirdre, can I just interject there? I mean, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I love the visual representation, and I love that you gave pieces enough character to be directional, but not enough to be prescriptive, and mm-hmm. to allow that to lift up based on each person's individual experience. You talk about leaving the workshop being inspired by what we've done, clearly. Mm-hmm. And in your experience, and this isn't unique to Speculative Futures, but a broader design question is, what changes from being inspired by to the people who actually, as you shared with the artist, who actually developed the suit, but not only developed the space suit, but wore it out into public to engage his community. Mm-hmm. How do you make that shift from inspired by to inspired to take action?
I think that's a really good question. I don't know how straightforward the answer is. You know, I think in certain scenarios, you can take it on an individual level or on a systemic level. So, you know, for me, walking away from this workshop that we produced, and we ended up designing some objects to share with the community. We ended up designing a set of tableware that were less than functional to sort of use as a metaphor for people to engage with. And we have had since put on public, not displays, but public workshops engaging people in this conversation. I think on a personal level, as a designer, let's say on a personal level, I walked away understanding what that experience is like for people, and committed to being an advocate for criminal justice reform, in not necessarily every single day I'm writing letters, but in that I am understanding of this situation, I am supportive of reform, and I am actively engaging and offering the services and skills that I have as a designer to assist in this cause, right? But also, I think the takeaway on a larger scale is understanding better how working collaboratively can change your worldview, how that changes when you are designing an object. Let's say you're designing like a teapot or something. When you start working collaboratively with people, and understanding what their personal needs are, your design changes, right? You don't necessarily design it exactly the way that you want it. You start to incorporate feedback from other people. And in a similar way, we're talking about a greater systemic issue, a little more complex than maybe a teapot. But it's the same thing. We want to look at we want to expand our worldview and also really listen to the people who we're designing for, like how it affects them, and also really listen to what they want, right? Not what we think they want. That's my biggest takeaway, is really listening to what people want and helping to assist them in implementing that, is probably the biggest takeaway for me.
I really appreciate that. And that's where listening to be heard or listening to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taking that time to really listening to understand the other person. Not just to hear what they say and compare it against your worldview.
Right.
Thinking of my work with incarcerated individuals, and imagine the transition in your life when one day a fork is a weapon and the next day a fork is a status symbol.
Right. Right.
Like, that's like, how do you make that transition in your mind and in your being and in your definition of yourself and your understanding of your environment? Like, it's not planned for, but it's the lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I think that, coming from an industrial and product design world, industrial designers are like infamously egotistical in that we really, we understand ergonomics, we understand how people behave. And so we have this inflated sense of like, we really know what's best in terms of design,
Right.
And I think there's a culture to that. And I say we, because I'm included in that culture. And I think it's really important for us as designers to step back and to listen more. I mean, there are entire blogs that are devoted to designs that are completely blind to what people actually need and are really thoughtless and really, quite silly when you think about it.
Sure.
And it's being intentional with how we design, intentional with what we design, what materials we use when we design, and also asking ourselves, is there a need for this? What do people need? Really listening to what people need, really standing back and not interrupting and taking it in is like a big step for, I think, all designers. So that's just my personal point of view, but
no, I appreciate it, and it was very well said. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna move on just to the last bit here. I might skip ahead to our very last example. So I wanted to share the work of the Extrapolation Factory, which is Elliot P. Montgomery and Chris Wobkin. They are based in New York City. They have built an entire practice that's based on facilitating participatory explorations of speculative futures. So their whole entire practice is about these workshops that are collaborative with non-designers. And this is a page from their operations manual, which is a published document of their methodology and how they extrapolate futures through these methods. I highly recommend anybody who's interested in speculative futures to look into their work. And I'm just going to skip ahead to this last example so that for the sake of time. This is a project called Transition Habitats that they did in 2017 for the Walker Art Center. And it's a multiple tiered participatory exploration. So they engaged with visitors on a 4-day visioning exercise. And visitors at the Walker Art Center were asked to propose urban infrastructure modifications that could support species being impacted by changing climates. So people were engaged in questions and methodology that helped them to start thinking about, what could we change to our urban infrastructure to sort of support these species of animals, right? Such as butterflies, rabbits, bats, birds, those sorts of things. This is in Minneapolis, so we're talking about their local animals and habitats. And they designed these miniature models And they were then, displayed at the Walker Art Center, but that also shared with biologists and other scientists to discuss basically, and ecologists and researchers. So they're pulling in experts at this point to discuss some of the infrastructure that was proposed by the regular day people who were visiting the Walker Art Center. They wanted to bring these to experts to help to filter and develop the list of concepts that people came up with. And something that came up over and over and over again, they said in this project, was the kind of conversation of communication. How do we as humans know what these animals need and how do we know how the animals are being impacted? So they actually began to develop these mailboxes that were meant to facilitate conversations between animals and humans. And I think it's just like super, super interesting because we're talking about not just collaborative projects with ourselves as humans, but collaborating with other species, right? So what messages would non-human organisms send to decision makers? If a non-human individual messaged a politician, what would they be considered as a constituent? And how can we encourage them to communicate these things? So they came up with these mailboxes. This is an example of a migratory bird mail collection box. And it serves as a birdhouse that listens to the calls of birds, such as warblers, and simultaneously allows them to track shifts in their migration patterns in the spring and fall. And they came up with other things, like a pollinator mailbox collection for monarch butterflies and other insects with an artificial flower, and a lichen mailbox straddling a boulder that's covered in lichen, so it enables viewers to observe growth patterns and color changes, because lichen is a good indicator of air quality. And the final form of this collaboration is in the forthcoming months, they had visitors like observing all of these mailboxes and collecting all this data and then writing letters, actual postcards to their elected officials, representatives. So this is the letter to Representative Jason Lewis. And they're writing a letter on behalf of migratory birds and advocating for these birds, right? So this is like a little bit of a step in the present and also in the future, whereas we're not actually communicating necessarily with these animals, but they started with a question: what if we could communicate with these animals, and what does that reality look like? And if we can do that or can communicate with these other species, what happens? What do we learn, and how can we advocate on their behalf? So the post office, in their words, they said, the post office will help visitors interpret messages from non-human individuals as handwritten letters to local representatives. I think this is such a fascinating project because it's cross-collaborative with experts in the scientific field, but also with other species and then just regular people. These are regular visitors to the art museum in Minneapolis. So there's multiple tiers of collaboration here. And
that's fascinating. That's just, that blows me away to think that that's, it makes perfect sense, obviously. I had an example literally like 2 weeks ago. There's a family of Cooper's hawks that have nested in between my yard and another yard, in a tree between my yard and another yard. And one of the juvenile Cooper's hawks had captured a stuffed animal, like a dog toy or a kid's stuffed animal, and was holding onto it like a piece of prey and was picking it apart like it would pick apart, a carcass. And it was just throwing all this fluff everywhere, but we know that that's poisonous. And what it was ingesting, I have no idea. And just to think that, like, what would that bird say? Like, hey kid, pick up your freaking toys. Like, like, that's really a comment of like our socioeconomic privilege, in that we have things we can leave outside and have no even concept that a bird may die because you left your toy outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beyond fascinating. Both of you, Anna and Deidre, what you've shared is beyond fascinating. And you're both, I'm blown away by the depth of your knowledge and your passion for this topic, both of you. So and your collaboration on this across continents was seamless. You're both speaking with the same voice, with the same passion for this. So incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's such a pleasure to do this presentation. We wanted to leave it.
Oh, I'm sorry, but especially please plug the your Speculative Futures groups and maybe your next meetup. And I know there's a Slack channel, and just in general how folks can connect more deeply with this content.
Yeah, we forgot to do a little slide to plug all of our personal communities, but you know, I am a member of the San Francisco Speculative Design group. They're really awesome group that you know, they're thinking about design futures in a really interesting way. And they're also the people who run the program are really open and interesting, thoughtful people, and very accessible. So there's a Speculative Futures Slack. Let me find that and I'll put it in the chat. And I'll also, if you are interested in Speculative Futures, I'm gonna get out of here really quickly. I highly recommend the Primer conference, which they have a lot of their conferences are online. So you can, you know, learn a lot more about people's work, like Ao's work. His work is really fascinating to me because he's doing speculative design on a cultural level. Let me find these links really quickly and send them to you.
Well,
Anna, do you have anything?
If you actually, both of you just want to kind of aggregate your work into a slide or a PDF, I'll be happy to share that with everyone who registered and include a link in the notes when we post your talk. And so cool. We can always, you know, the joy of editing, right? We can slip that in.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We'll do that.
I've got a few links that I would like to share as well. So, and the Primer conference is amazing. You have all the recordings online, and I will highly recommend. It was just
a few weeks ago, right? The end of June?
Yes.
Yeah.
The end of June.
Yeah. Also, we want to leave space if anybody has any questions, but feel free to chime in. But
Johan's in, my friend Johan is in Sweden. I know he's probably got a million questions. Well, Anna, I think you know Johan, and but so he, oh hey Johan, there's my man. Oh, you're muted. There you go, buddy. Did you have any friend?
Yeah, well, I had bad connection, so it was going up and down. But I'm sorry, or I said like this. I'd like to be inspired too, as you say, Jeff.
Yes.
And I'm really, really inspired to create something from the butterfly, the necklace. We were talking about it would be so nice to be able to track the emotions in the hospital, for example, on the people working there, to see where do we see most pain, where do we see most joy, and is there possible to make patterns out of that and actually act on that? That would be so beautiful. So what is the state about the necklace?
Well, for the moment, it's just a prototype, but I'm sure there will be different technologies researching on that at the moment, especially because of COVID-19. There were so many people suffering that were not able to communicate. So I feel that technology in that sense has evolved a lot, because that's a prototype from 2006, I think. So it's from a long time ago. So it has to have evolved for sure. I will dig into that and I will send you some links.
Oh, perfect. I also love the cones. Those are brilliant. I need to think more about them, but I think there is so much to think about actually when it comes to the cones and the preferred and the potential of possible futures. That was brilliant.
Well, it's Friday evening in Europe, even though it's very bright there, Johan. I know it's getting later in the day, and so you have a lot to think about this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, those cones were developed by Joseph Voros. And he is like a founder in the field as well. And there have been a lot of iterations over the years on those cones, and people are starting to add little segments to it or expand and contract. Extrapolation Factory has one. I'll try to find it and send it to you guys, where the preferred future is actually an oval. It's not round. It's a different shape. It incorporates different ratios. And it's a really, really good starter. It's a really good starting point for speculative futures, for thinking about what it is that we want, and sort of allowing there to be space for maybe less probable scenarios to sort of permeate and influence how we change the world. It's very cool.
Yeah, I really like that one too. It's kind of like you need some framework sometimes to be able to expand your ideas. So when you have the framework, you follow it, and then you're able to think outside of the box. Because otherwise, if you just brainstorm, it's very difficult.
You need to have a box in order to be able to think outside of it, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's great.
Thank you, Johan. I appreciate you joining as always. You're a good friend, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your thoughts. Anna, Deirdre, thank you very much. I'll send you the edited version of the talk shortly. And again, please just share a few, even if you just want to email me the links, I'll aggregate them into a slide or something for you, and make sure they're posted in the notes and also at the end of the talk. So with gratitude, thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us to speak. It was such a pleasure to put together the presentation.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.